Welcome back to Pod Save the World, the show where I try to bring you behind the scenes into the White House foreign policy decision-making process by interviewing some of the people I worked with along the way. Today's a very special episode for me. I interview a guy named Ben Rhodes, who's Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. He was also my office mate, and he was, probably one of the closest advisors on foreign policy for President Obama, period, for 8 years. It is a fascinating conversation. Ben led the talks with Cuba about reestablishing diplomatic relations. He was in all the big meetings and all the big decisions along the way. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Welcome to Pod Save the World. My guest today is Ben Rhodes. I believe I should start with the disclosure that I worked for Ben. We actually shared an office, and I sat like 10 feet away from him, so he heard me yell at reporters, generally be a pain in the ass to people. And so this interview might sound a little bit more like a couple guys telling old war stories who had cool jobs one day. But Ben was the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications at the White House and a speechwriter for President Obama. So thank you, Ben, for being here.
Good to be here. My first post-White House media appearance.
This is huge.
Yeah.
This is huge for me. How are you doing without the PDB every day? Are you content with the Trump version of Twitter and Fox and Friends?
It's a good question. I think having been there for 8 years, on the one hand, what the PDB does is it essentially aggregates the worst things that are happening in the world for you, including the things that are kind of coming down the pike that might not be in the newspaper today, but are going to be in a week or two. So you have a bit of a heads up on things. But the other side of it is it's not that surprising. Most of the things that you would get in the PDB or in your intel, frankly, if you carefully read the newspaper and follow events, yes, you might not have certain specific intelligence, but in terms of what's going on in the world, you can have a pretty good sense.
Right. You had a pretty extraordinary career arc over the last decade. You spent 5 years working at the Wilson Center for former Congressman Lee Hamilton on projects like the Iraq Study Group, the 9/11 Commission report, and then you joined the campaign as a speechwriter. How did you make that leap from foreign policy guy to foreign policy writer?
Well, the thing is, I never had a real mapped out career plan, which worked to my advantage because the people I know who had kind of a rigid vision of here's how I get from X to Y to Z tended to box themselves in and not pursue opportunities. After doing the 9/11 Commission with Hamilton and then the Iraq Study Group, what I basically decided is, the 9/11 Commission and the Iraq Study Group basically did as much as you could do in kind of a nonpartisan basis. But I saw that you can only make a difference around the edges and that you actually have to get into politics and you have to get into the fight if you want to change direction on foreign policy. So I was adamant that I wanted to get into that 2008 cycle. And Obama was the one guy I wanted to work for. So I basically, I knew Dennis McDonough. I knew Mark Lippert, who was the Senate foreign policy guy at the time. And I offered to just work for free. And so did a lot of people. But, you get to know people that way. And when a speechwriting job opened up on the campaign in the spring, I jumped on it.
Right. So the lesson to all young people who want to work in politics, do a campaign.
The lesson is if you want to work in the White House, don't have a plan to work in the White House.
Right.
Have a plan to follow people that you're interested in and get on a campaign or get in a congressional office. I mean, people ask me about grad school. I'm like, not many people go from the Masters in International Relations to the White House. They go from a congressional office or a campaign to the White House.
Right. So you do a couple years as a speechwriter, and then you make this transition to Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. Now, that's a big promotion in any situation, but you also happen to be following Dennis McDonough, who you just mentioned, who is like one of the closest aides to Obama, ended up becoming the chief of staff to the president in later years. I'm wondering, what was that learning curve like for you in those early days?
Well, in a strange way on the campaign, I ended up doing a job that wasn't that dissimilar from what the Deputy National Security Advisor job was because I was a speechwriter, so I wrote all the foreign policy speeches. But, out in Chicago, a campaign is a startup, and if people figure out that you know something, they go to you. So I had to do a little bit of press. I had to do debate prep. I had to help write policy papers and fact sheets. So I had done a bit of the different things that I was going to have to do in the deputy job. When I got it in September of 2009, I think the steepest curve for me is I think people don't realize you're not just, and this, you're not just working in the White House. You're suddenly responsible for coordinating what the State Department is saying, what the Pentagon is saying, what the intelligence community is saying. So for me, the steepest learning curve was suddenly working with this apparatus of literally thousands of people in the U.S. government, from embassies to combatant commands to war zones.
Right.
And you're talking to all those people almost every day. And you're having to formulate how the U.S. government is presenting itself. And so it's not just about the president and what he says or even what the press secretary says. It's about what all of the U.S. government is saying.
Right. So I think one interesting thing you did early on that I think married the speech writing and your future job at Deputy National Security Advisor was you helped President Obama write the Cairo speech, which was a pretty extraordinary effort to reach out to the Muslim world after the Iraq War essentially destroyed opinion of the U.S. abroad. Obviously that speech, 8 years of Obama, didn't solve all our problems in that region, far from it. But I'm wondering what you think, looking back of that effort, how well we did given what was possible. And I think how much damage you think Trump has done in this first few weeks with this Muslim ban, which you have ISIS openly celebrating.
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the Cairo speech, from a policy perspective, kind of laid out, here's where we'd like to get on a whole set of issues. And if you look at it as a report card, there's some things that we talked about that we did that are really important, like an Iranian nuclear deal,
right.
Avoiding a war with Iran, drawing down significantly our troop presence in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's some things that we didn't do, like Arab-Israeli peace. That doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing, though. I always get a little annoyed at the notion that you shouldn't set ambitious goals unless you're going to meet all of them. Obama was able to get things done as president because he set a whole bunch of ambitious goals. He didn't accomplish them all, but because he had that ambition, he did some pretty extraordinary things around the world. But the second part of that speech is, look, while it didn't resolve every grievance or eliminate many of the tensions that are roiling the Arab and Muslim world, it provided a basis for dialogue. And at a minimum, it averted a narrative of a war between the United States and Islam that is precisely what terrorist groups want. And that gave us space to work with other countries who are Muslim-majority countries. I think people need to realize, and this will get into the ban, counterterrorism work just doesn't work if it's only us. Mm-hmm. If you want to break up a terrorist cell in Southeast Asia, you have to work with Malaysia and Indonesia. If you want to rescue a hostage in Yemen, you need the permission of the Yemeni government to do a counterterrorism raid. And we did have that cooperation from Muslim-majority nations throughout our presidency. And that doesn't mean there weren't huge threats from terrorism, but it means that we had a basis for getting things done. Now, this is the problem with the ban, is that it's 7 countries. That has an immediate impact on human beings. And, like sometimes in politics, it's like, how is this being received? Mm-hmm. It was a bad rollout. I could care less about the rollout.
Yeah, me too.
There are tens of thousands of people whose lives are upended by this. There are translators who work with our military in Iraq and Afghanistan who cannot get into the country and whose lives may be at risk. There are people who are students, or there are people who are on other exchanges who suddenly their lives are upended. They can't be in touch with their families. They can't travel here and back, and so they're having to rethink their entire lives. That's the first point. The second point, though, is that the negative impression that this creates across the entire Muslim world is profound, not just in these 7 countries. And this is really important. Everybody, yes, there are only 7 countries, but every country in the world is looking at this and making judgments about what this president, this administration thinks about Muslims. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in Malaysia or Indonesia or Egypt or any one of the countries that's not on the list, you're still looking at this and making a judgment that this seems hostile and targeted towards Muslims. And that's going to make it harder for countries to work with us. And beyond that, the last thing I'd just say is that we said this for years, that the reason we didn't have an ideological frame around our counterterrorism efforts, we didn't say we were at war with radical Islam, is because that's exactly what the terrorists want. And we know this. I mean, it's not a theory. It's based on what they say and how they try to recruit and what they're.
Bin Laden wanted to change the name of Al Qaeda precisely because we had reframed.
That's right. This is one of the more satisfying things that I do think President Obama should get credit for the Cairo speech and other efforts. When we went into Abbottabad and got the media out of Bin Laden's compound. We ended up declassifying this. he was communicating with other al-Qaeda members about the fact that al-Qaeda didn't work anymore as a brand because we had so narrowed the focus of the war to not the U.S. versus Islam, but the U.S. versus a terrorist organization, al-Qaeda, that also killed Muslims, that he felt that they needed a brand that brought in a religious identity, frankly foreshadowing what ISIS would end up doing, which is branding themselves as an Islamic organization. And again, we've already seen reports that ISIL is celebrating this ban, that they are referring to it as the blessed ban, because this now allows them, as awful and nihilistic and completely abhorrent as they are. So I'm not saying that they're right, they're completely wrong. But they will go in their recruitment efforts and say, well, look, the United States really is at war with Islam. They're targeting, they're saying they're at war with radical Islam. They're targeting Muslim countries for, exclusion from the United States, and that's going to make the job of our counterterrorism professionals harder.
You mentioned the need to work with partners, and I think, it's a really interesting point, right? Because there are some countries that are willing and able to help us and have strong intelligence services, militaries, and there's some partners that are lacking capacity, and we have to do a lot of things ourselves in those regions. And it brings to mind Yemen, which is a hotbed for AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, from which has emanated some of the most dangerous attacks during President Obama's time in the White House. And I read earlier that they are actually going to tell the United States that we can no longer conduct unilateral missions in Yemen. And I'm wondering what you think the consequences of that decision might be. And reading about this Yemen operation that Trump approved apparently over dinner with Ivanka and Jared Kushner and not in the White House Situation Room, like leafing through a concept of operation that detailed the plan. I'm wondering, is that normal? Is that dangerous? I mean, what's your take on this, having probably worked on this issue?
Well, look, when we would have a counterterrorism operation like that is a ground operation, a risky operation, a special forces operation, that was always put through a very rigorous process. You would have meetings at different levels of the government to review the plan. So the people who are at the deputy level, the deputy secretary of defense and state and vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, they all review the plan. And then it goes up to the principals level, the cabinet level, and the national security advisor and the secretary of defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. They all review it. And then it goes to the president for his review and ultimate approval. And what you do in that process is you identify the vulnerabilities in the plan, and you think through whether or not it's worth doing or not. So no, President Obama never would have made that type of decision, over dinner. He would have made it around the table in the Situation Room or in the Oval Office with a group of the right advisors, to include, military intelligence and counterterrorism advisors. And look, this points to the risk, because we put a lot of time and effort into trying to minimize civilian casualties in our counterterrorism operations. Part of that is a moral obligation. And part of that also is if you are engaged in operations in another country that are taking the lives of civilians, ultimately that government is going to say, you can't do that here anymore because it's creating too much problems for us. And so from what I've read about this raid, tragically, we lost a Navy SEAL and a significant number of civilians died for this type of operation. And now we see a potential consequence, which is if the Yemeni government is saying you can no longer do these types of raids here, well, what is that going to mean? The next time we need to rescue a hostage or we need to go after a high-value al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula figure who we might be able to have an opportunity to detain. This is why cooperation is not like an end in itself because we all want to feel like we're all getting along. It's very practical. If we don't get buy-in from other countries, we can't get things done around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in a place like Yemen, it's unbelievably dangerous. More nerdy foreign policy coming up on Pod Save the World. It's time to make your next move with Squarespace, and remember this code, Save the World. If you're starting a business, changing careers, or launching a creative project, you're going to need a website. Lock down your next move with a unique domain and create a website around your new idea. With Squarespace's all-in-one platform, there's nothing to install, patch, or upgrade ever. Create a beautiful website or online store with an award-winning template, the most beautiful way to present your ideas online. Squarespace is used by a wide range of creatives, people and businesses, musicians, designers, artists, restaurants, and more. And Squarespace provides award-winning 24/7 customer support. Make your next move with a beautiful website from Squarespace. Use offer code SAVETHEWORLD for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain by using the offer code SAVETHEWORLD. Make your next move. Pod Save the World is also brought to you by Blue Apron. Not all ingredients are created equal. Fresh, high-quality ingredients make a real difference, so it's important to know where your food comes from. Blue Apron has a more sustainable food system that includes partnerships with local farms, fisheries, and ranchers all across the country. And Blue Apron is just fun to use. I made some amazing samosas the other night with my girlfriend. They tasted great. I felt like I had accomplished something. I had a glass of wine because it was a Tuesday, and why the hell not? I deserve it, right? So Blue Apron is also more affordable. For less than $10 per person per meal, Blue Apron delivers seasonal recipes along with pre-portioned ingredients to make delicious home-cooked meals. There's a huge variety of options that are easy to make and come fresh every time. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/crookedworld. You will love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with Blue Apron. So don't wait. That's blueapron.com/crookedworld. Blue Apron, a better way to cook. Switching gears a little bit, during your time at the White House, your portfolio grew even beyond communications and speechwriting, and you became an emissary for the president to deliver messages directly. And I think one of the most fascinating examples, you were one of the 2 members of the administration who were tapped to lead the secret negotiations to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba. And I'm wondering if you could tell us, you held these talks in secret in Canada, of all places. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. How many people in the world knew about these talks when you started, and what kind of lies did you have to tell Anne and everybody else, that's Ben's wife, when you disappeared to Canada and came back smelling like Cuban cigars and rum?
Well, actually, on the last point, what used to drive me crazy is the Cubans are very gregarious. And so they would always give us cigars and rum as gifts, but we could never accept them because, for a couple of reasons. One, I think it exceeded the legal limit of cigars I could bring in the country. But 2, which, by the way, we've changed. Now you can bring as many Cuban cigars as you want.
Thanks, Obama.
Yep, thanks, Obama. But also because, how it would kind of blow my cover story if I started showing up with boxes of Cuban cigars and rum. So I'd always give the Canadians these gifts, which they deserved for hosting us. It was very strange because we did a lot of meetings. I think before the announcement, we did something like 12 or 15 meetings, and we subsequently had many more after the announcement. But the first couple, I think I tried to invent some story, like I was out for this reason or doing something. And then they were so frequent that I just started, I just wouldn't show up to work, and I wouldn't tell anybody why. And people didn't really ask. But what was strange, the strangest part about it is there's an expectation in your job that you're going to be responsive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd go into these 8-hour sessions, and we'd take a break after 3 hours, and I'd have 300 emails, including reporters and
Ben Rhodes never emails me back.
Yeah, so thankfully I already had a reputation for not emailing some people back, but so I tried to kind of respond enough so it looked like I wasn't off the grid, because I didn't want to say I was out of the country because they'd be like, well, where are you, right? So I just try to do enough to make it appear like I wasn't totally off the grid in a way that would raise suspicions. I frankly had this moment of dread every time I walked through Dulles Airport that I was going to run into somebody. And miraculously, the secret held. And I got to say, the Canadians were really good about this because they knew it needed to be secret. I mean, at the beginning in the White House, there were probably less than 10 people who knew about this, and nobody outside of the White House knew about it. And unless our intelligence community probably knew about it because they have their own ways of knowing things. But and then the Canadians kept it really tight. And when we would get there, they would kind of meet us at the gate. Some amiable Canadian would kind of hustle us through immigration or whatever we had to pass through, and then kind of put us in a car and drive us about an hour outside of Ottawa to this facility they had. And, you'd have these meetings and they'd be sandwiches at lunch, and then you'd not be able to take your Cuban cigars and rum, and you'd go back and get on the plane.
Were those conversations contentious? Are these people going to be your friends for life? What's the vibe in the room?
The vibe in the room at the beginning was really, I don't want to say contentious, but it was what you'd think, which is they wanted to debate the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Oh my God,
I spent the first. I think I described the first meeting as an 8-hour throat clearing exercise where they would every crime in their view that the United States had committed, from the Bay of Pigs to assassination efforts on Fidel Castro to Miami-backed groups that sought to
greatest hits album.
It was just a greatest hits album of Cuban grievances. And instead of kind of like debating every point, I'd just be like, guys, I mean, this is where my youth was helpful, because I'd just be like, guys, I wasn't even born when that happened. I'm here to talk about the future. And President Obama wasn't even born when some of this stuff happened. And that kind of sunk in. And after they had kind of gotten it off their chest the first 2 or 3 meetings, we kind of bore down on the things we were trying to solve, and then realized actually we could be much more ambitious. We were just trying to get Alan Gross out of prison at first, but then we realized, well, we got an opening here. These people, are actually ready to talk about the whole relationship. And so the ambition grew over the course of the negotiations. And we did develop really good relationships with these guys. I mean, that doesn't mean I agree with them at everything, but that's the only way you're going to get anything done in diplomacy.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about when you went to the Vatican, both with President Obama and I think unilaterally, to brief them on these efforts. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, the interesting thing is that the Vatican has long supported better relations between the U.S. and Cuba, and that only got more the case with Pope Francis, because he was, he's from Latin America. He's from Argentina. So, everybody in Latin America wants there to be better relations between the United States and Cuba, which is one of the reasons why to do it, frankly. But when we went to the Vatican with President Obama in, I think, March of 2014, the Pope talked to him about Cuba more than any issue. And Obama kind of said to him, look, we've got something going, actually, which he had not yet said to any other leader. And it'd be great if you could be helpful. And we basically communicated to them that if they would offer that assistance formally, that would be useful. So we ended up getting a letter sent to Obama and Raul Castro that was essentially the same letter that said, we're ready to be helpful as it relates to efforts to resolve prisoner issues, which to us was Alan Gross, and to the Cubans was a handful of people in prison in the United States.
Alan Gross was a USAID contractor, had been detained for 4 or 5 years at that point?
That's right. He was a USAID subcontractor who was working on kind of democracy programming, detained early in our administration. And we knew we couldn't politically, humanitarian-wise, we wanted him out for his sake. And politically, we weren't going to improve relations with Cuba while a guy like that was in prison. And also offering to be helpful on the broader relationship. When we went back to the Vatican in October of 2014, we had actually basically finalized a series of agreements that were then announced in December. So the Vatican was really surprised by it. Like, they didn't know we were that far along. I think they thought they were hosting a meeting when in fact, and they were, and we were there for several hours, but they instead were essentially receiving these commitments we'd made, which, by the way, that was the role they played that was indispensable, because we can't trust each other.
Right.
How could they trust that we were going to do what we said? How could we trust that they were going to do what they said? So if we deposited those commitments at the Vatican, they were essentially a guarantor. Nobody could go back on something that they told the Pope. You know? And the Vatican could have come out and said, well, wait a second, these guys told us they were going to do X and they didn't. And so that's why, and only they could play that role, because they have a degree of respect and neutrality in both countries and around the world. And so it's really emotional because, they were overwhelmed. I remember there was one Vatican official who was in tears because he'd lived and worked in Cuba. And it gave me an initial impression as to how big a deal this is going to be around the world. And the weird thing about it is, I'm relatively anonymous. I'm not John Kerry when I go someplace. So when I walked out of the Vatican, I'm just some guy walking down the street in Rome. Me and Ricardo went and got a nice, dinner of, pasta and calamari and red wine and stuff. And we're like, shoot, we know this secret, that's going to really blow everybody's minds here. So it was this weird calm because the deal was done, but it wasn't public yet. And so you're carrying around this piece of information that is going to kind of send shockwaves out around the world.
Yeah, I think one of the proudest moments I had in my life of having worked for President Obama, and one of the moments I missed working at the White House the most, was when you guys went on that trip with the president to Cuba.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there a moment or an event that jumps out at you? Was it as earth-shattering as it looked from TV? Hard-hitting questions, I know.
Yeah, no, it was. I'd been to Cuba by that point a few times, but landing in Cuba on Air Force One, first of all, what's strange about going to Cuba is it is like 90 miles from Florida. Like you fly over the Keys and then you're like in Cuba in like 5 minutes. So like the absurdity of how removed we've been given how close we are sinks in. But then you think, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then here's Air Force One landing. And that moment, was really powerful. And also, frankly, you see the effect of the embargo, which I'm not proud of, which is like you fly over Miami and it's this gleaming city, and then you fly over these kind of dilapidated housing structures out by the airport, and it, that sinks in. But then in terms of moments, I think there were so many that were everything. I've never done anything, even in 8 years in that job, where everything that happened was like the first time it had ever happened.
Right.
And it was totally so. Like Raul Castro took questions. Like he's never done that.
That was incredible.
Like they had a press conference. Like that was unbelievable. President of the United States standing in Revolutionary Square with like Che Guevara's face and on a building nearby, and the U.S. national anthem being played was incredible. When the president addressed the Cuban people, they broadcasted live. And so here he is talking about our values, our democracy, and that's in every Cuban home. And the audience, we negotiated this very interesting audience because there were Cuban Americans there, and Cuban Americans who've opposed the Castro government. And then there was Raul Castro, and they were all in the same room together. That never happened before. So everything was new. But the one anecdote that's kind of unusual that always stuck with me is it was an incredibly hard trip to organize. And you remember, Tommy. Like
Can't even imagine.
A president's trip is always a pain to organize because we annoy the hell out of every country because we send like all this military aircraft and equipment and hundreds of people. And so there are always fights. But with Cuba, there were 10 times as many fights because they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, what is happening?
Is this another Bay of Pigs? Like, or are you guys like, what's in that cargo plane? You know? And so our advanced staff had like a real hell of a time. And this guy, Duncan Teeter, who's like an awesome advanced guy, he was just going out of his mind and not sleeping, and he was furious and like all these fights. And he said then the day before we got there, they built a stage for this event we did on entrepreneurship. And these two Cuban guys kind of finally finished building this dais with like the Cuban and American flags behind it and sat down to have a beer. And they all just sat down and they just all started crying.
That's
because they're just looking at these flags together.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait a second, this is real,
Yeah. You know what? Raise a beer for all the advanced staffers out there who did heroic work
heroes, man.
For no credit and never slept on
They
those
made
trips.
everybody else look good and never got credit.
They made all of us look good and saved our asses when we got lost. And like,
well, I'm curious. Look, I'm curious about the Trump international trips.
Oh my God.
Because look, some of it, the machinery government kicks in and the State Department moves things around. But actually it takes a lot of work. And I'd watch the first couple trips to see how those come off.
Yeah, seriously. Changing gears a tiny bit, you and I sort of lived the full sea change of information access and awareness sort of just getting dumped out into the public. But I'd start with WikiLeaks. I mean, I was at the White House during WikiLeaks, and I will never forget the first meeting you and I had with the New York Times. Like someone emailed one of my bosses, and it got kicked to you and me. And we went over and we sat down with Dean Baquet, who was the Washington bureau chief, and like the Secretary of War suite in the EOB with like 5 of the scariest New York Times reporters who just only crushed you with reports when they called. And they laid out their binder of everything that was in there. And I remember walking out of that meeting, and you and I just sort of stopped and looked at each other and laughed because we were like, we are so fucked.
Yeah.
How can we
so
possibly
far beyond
deal
our
with this?
ability to respond.
Right. And then to the Times' great credit, they worked with us on redactions. But then you flash forward to the last days of administration. The president pardoned Chelsea Manning for leaking those documents, rightly in my opinion. I'm wondering if you could talk about why he chose to pardon Manning, and if you think, is overclassification a bigger problem when you're talking about a situation like WikiLeaks where it's secret level cables? And I was going to ask you about Snowden later because obviously that's a different beast.
Yeah.
But I was wondering how you guys arrived
Well,
at
look,
that.
before I get to the pardon, I just want to get something off my chest about WikiLeaks. And you're right. Like the scope of the release of the cables was beyond our ability to comprehend. Like they've done some stuff in Iraq before you finally deal with that. This was all around the world, and it did put lives at risk. I remember meeting a guy in one of our embassies overseas who told me that he had been at our embassy in Canada. he used to meet with, people coming to our embassies meet with us all the time. So this guy met with somebody who worked on kind of reservations in Canada, Native peoples. And he used to say, like, you should know these are what's happening in the drug trade here,
Oh, wow.
human trafficking. And this guy said that, that was all in the cables because then they read a cable, sent it back.
Yep.
And that after the WikiLeaks things, that guy just disappeared.
Okay.
And I was like, well, what happened to him? He's like, I don't know. He's gone. Like, I don't know if
accounting
harm
for that.
came to him or if he just got scared and moved somewhere. Point being is just one small example of. So the one thing I'd take issue with at the time, so we had these debates with Dean, who's a wonderful guy, but I think in retrospect, even though they did the redactions, the Times and Der Spiegel and the Guardian all published all those WikiLeaks. It legitimized WikiLeaks.
Oh, absolutely.
Just the fact that they were in a partnership with the New York Times kind of bestowed on them like almost a journalistic credibility that they don't deserve.
No.
And now we see that they're basically just a front for the FSB and for Russian intelligence generally. And so I think that's something that news organizations need to wrestle with because, yes, they're always going to side with transparency, but the motive matters.
I agree with you. This bothers me too because there are some reporters who are just agnostic about the source of information. A document is a document. But clearly this election showed that there was an agenda and there was a political motive behind this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was clear, even if it wasn't clear back then that WikiLeaks was working for the Russians, it was clear that their motive was to delegitimize the United States around the world. It wasn't transparency. Because they weren't targeting anybody else except us.
Right.
Now, on Chelsea Manning, look, I had misgivings. But the reason why I think that the president did it, and again I think is appropriate to do, is not. You have to look at what he did. He did not pardon her, so he did not absolve the crime. He did not, in the explanation, say, "Well, this is because she was just trying to do something for transparency." It wasn't an absolving of her motives.
Commutation.
It was just the conditions, the nature of the sentence and the conditions she was in were untenable. It was a mercy. An act of mercy that essentially, here's somebody who got a much longer sentence than somebody usually does for that kind of thing, who was being held in really extreme circumstances given who she is. And I think he just felt like, she's paid for this. She's expressed remorse. She served time. And there's like a cruelty to having her serve out her entire sentence. And that's, I think, what ultimately informed him. Yeah. Not any positive view of her or WikiLeaks.
Sure. You're listening to Pod Save the World. Stick around. There's more great show coming your way. Betterment's mission is to help people manage and grow their wealth. Betterment has developed smarter technology that automates investing and helps you make better financial decisions and invest for your personal goals. It's the better way to invest your financial future. Make sure that you and your family are set up for success. It's actually a better way to invest your money. Betterment combined time-tested investing principles with the transparency and ease of use you expect from great technology, focusing on lower fees and taxes. This is very important, guys. Keep an eye on those fees. They will get you. Betterment manages your investments with the same strategies that financial advisors use with clients who have millions of dollars. And here's what you might find refreshing. Betterment really cares that you reach your financial goal, and that's why they keep their fees low. Investing involves risk. Right now, you can get 1 month managed free with Betterment. To learn more, visit betterment.com/crookedworld. That's betterment.com/crookedworld. See how Betterment can help you improve your investments today. Go to betterment.com/crookedworld. Betterment, investing made better. I was gone for Snowden, but from the outside, that looked 100 times worse. And just to help people understand the nature of how these are different, the WikiLeaks cables were State Department cables. They were secret level. They were information about, reports back, classified, yes, but less sensitive. Snowden released top secret, some programs I wasn't read into about how we collect information on adversaries. Some of the most sensitive sources and methods we have, period, in the world that make it harder for us to collect information probably today on Iran's nuclear program or on the Russians or on name your 31 flavors of bad actors. So I'm wondering, what the hell was that like? How did you guys deal with it?
Yeah, look, and that was even worse. And the funny thing is, I would sometimes meet with journalists, opinion journalists. So people who work for magazines and stuff who are liberals, and they'd kind of be like, "Come on, you got to sympathize with Snowden," because they just figure temperamentally you're liberal, and But no, because first of all, number one, if the guy had gone to the mall and held a press conference and faced the consequence, I would have a ton of respect from him. Daniel Ellsberg did that.
Yep.
Daniel Ellsberg didn't go to Russia, right? Number two, he could have put out the information in a different way.
Yeah.
If he wanted to convey the scope of our metadata collection, there are ways to do that without putting out the blueprints.
Yeah.
And this is why, I think his motives are not pure. I've never believed for a second that guy was just a transparency activist or a privacy activist, because why put out all the blueprints of how we do this? And this is what, he didn't just put out the fact of metadata collection. Literally, it showed other countries, including hostile ones, like the blueprints for how the U.S. gathers intelligence. And, that has enormous ramifications that, I can't even begin to fully capture because, I'm not an intelligence professional. And I think it should not have been kind of put in my view, in the bucket that it was, which is this guy's a whistleblower. Because again, a whistleblower doesn't conspicuously pass through China to Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, and reporters are always say, well, are you telling me that that he was working for the Russians or what have you? I'm like, I'm not. I'm telling you what I see, which is this guy went to China and Russia, the two most adversarial intelligence competitors of the United States. He could have gone to, some very liberal European country that probably would have taken him in, right? Or he could have faced the music here. The choice of those destinations speaks volumes to me.
Yeah, what's always bothered me about Snowden is I think you need to compartmentalize these things. In hindsight, President Obama looked at some of the releases that were made about domestic intelligence collection on Americans and made some reforms. And that basket of issues, maybe there was some good that came of it. There was a whole other set of documents that had absolutely nothing to do with collection on Americans, and they were frequently timed to be released to create maximum tension with a country like Brazil or Germany or other places and important partners and allies. And I just wondered, why take so much and just dump it to somebody?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is another interesting question that you raised, right? Which is why Germany? They deliberately timed their releases and put them out in a way to disrupt U.S. relations with other countries.
Right.
That is not about whistleblowing either. That's about disrupting U.S. foreign policy. By the way, we see the same thing with what WikiLeaks is doing in Germany now too, but not to disrupt our relationship, but rather to undermine Merkel. It raises a lot of questions that are uncomfortable for defenders of Snowden. You're right. Germany and Brazil were the two countries they focused the most on, that we took the biggest hit in our foreign relations. Although Germany, we recovered pretty quickly. Brazil, we almost never did. What value of privacy did that serve?
Yeah, it bothers me. I would like to ask Glenn Greenwald these questions someday. I'm serious. I don't know him. I think he's passionate about what he writes and says. I'm curious. I mean, I wonder if he thinks that no country should ever collect intelligence ever. And if that's your principal position, okay. But it seems to only apply to us. I mean, I guess.
Well, yeah. That is, again, what is very peculiar to me is that China is doing much more far-reaching things in terms of censoring the internet and restricting internet access. Russia is doing much more aggressive things in terms of using cyberspace to intrude upon U.S. elections, but also people's privacy. Citizens. Why are they okay with that? If you're for a value, be for the value. And if you look at this kind of network of WikiLeaks and Snowden, and they seem to be for whatever is against America.
Right.
And I don't say that thinking we're perfect. And I'm glad we made some of the reforms we did around metadata collection here and around the world. But, and this is another important point, we're better than they are. We're better than the Russians are in upholding values. We're better than Chinese are. And if you delegitimize us, that's what the Russians want and what the Chinese want. It makes us a less credible defender of those values. I remember, this will get me in trouble. I remember talking to one of the, a wonderful organization, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and they do so much to defend journalism around the world. And so I want that to be very clear. But, they had the kind of scathing report about us that had stuff in it like the press pool at the White House didn't get access to like certain meetings the president had. Or,
Tiger Woods golfing with Obama.
Yeah, or like, there just wasn't a pool spray in this meeting, or we talk on background, or, and look, these are all legitimate points that we can debate. I'm not saying that, they might not have a point that, we seek to put information out in ways that like reach certain audiences, or, but
we're a communication shop. That's what we do.
Yeah, but the problem to me is when that is like kind of in some big ball of information together with like countries that are like literally killing and jailing journalists, Like there has to be a hierarchy. The U.S. gets more criticism because we're the U.S. And I frankly think Obama got more criticism because he was Obama. And they knew temperamentally he was like there's never going to be a more progressive president. So we're going to hold him to a much higher standard than we'd ever hold anybody else because we want him to overperform, which I get. But the risk of that is, other countries say, well, look, they're criticizing them too. Well, the pool access is different than the fact that you just put a blogger in prison.
The hyperbolic statements that sometimes come out that Obama's the most secretive administration since Nixon, or that we had an unprecedented number of leak investigations, even though the total number you're talking about is like 7 or 8, and half of them are holdovers. I think another problem with that is when you have an administration like the Trump administration that is so hostile to the press that you've lost your ability because you cried wolf so many times before. I mean, it's harder to get people to care about these things now.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the when they were going to like cancel the White House briefing, it was like, well, wait a second, like that's or like there's
one press conference in transition.
Yeah, and there's like there's another thing about even like everybody makes fun of Sean Spicer for like the lying. But like the briefings are like 30 minutes long.
They're so short.
I mean, Josh should go for like an hour, 2 hours.
Right. The AP is supposed to call what it ends.
And so everything seems to be a little bit different now, especially this kind of – look, what the strangest thing to me is like the Bowling Green massacre thing is like a joke on Twitter. But like, I mean, shoot, like imagine if like you and I are people who were – subjected to years of investigations because we used information provided to us by the intelligence community that evolved over time. And, for that, we had a multi-year Benghazi investigation, all centered around what a U.S. official said on a television show. Well, here's a U.S. official, like, on a television show, like, literally saying things about a terrorist attack that never happened. Yeah. I know there's an overused term of normalizing, but like if it's just kind of not that big a deal that if someone isn't, it just feels like over time there's going to be this acceptance that, well, facts don't matter. And now, look, I think some people are now taking that on, doing great journalism, but if facts aren't the standard to which people are held accountable. And look, I didn't mind, like, yeah, sure, hold us accountable on Benghazi that like we had to put out the facts as we got them. Right. What we always said is when we got new information, we put them out. But if we would never just kind of willfully lie, and despite what every troll on Twitter might say to me, like, we spent an enormous amount of time. I'll give you an example. You know this. We would take a strike and take out a very important terrorist. And we would wait like weeks to confirm it until like we had it airtight because we didn't want to put something out that wasn't true or we didn't know to be true yet. I mean, there are any number of examples we could use like that. And I just worry if beyond press access issues and things, it's just more like the degradation of facts as the basis for how the U.S. government communicates.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talked to Jake Sullivan about this a bit too. I mean, I guess in hindsight, what we screwed up, what we should have done with 2020 hindsight is just have said nothing. But I don't know that that's tenable, right? Because I think back to the bin Laden operation. And John Brennan, who had been hunting Osama bin Laden for 50 years of his life, who had lost friends in terrorist attacks, you and I asked him if he would brief what happened in the operation like the day after it occurred because he was one of the few people on the planet who knew what happened. And he misstated some facts based on the best rundown of what we thought had happened at the time. And we were savaged for that, for saying that bin Laden had used a woman as a human shield or had a gun when he was just repeating back what he had been told.
But the bigger thing, I'm going to make a bigger point on that, which is like the delegitimization of Obama went so far beyond birtherism. I won't say we, I'd say he, President Obama, literally together, ordered an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
And like within 2 days, we were getting attacked because like John Brennan had like been told an early version of events in the fog of war, about whether or not bin Laden had a gun or not, that we then clarified, right? But the point is that like... Yeah.
By the way, God forbid we misrepresent bin Laden's side of the story on this one,
But the point is it was more important to hurt Obama than to just feel good about this.
Yes.
Hey, guys, Republicans, like, we killed bin Laden. Like, that's great. Let's all feel good about this. But they couldn't do it. They couldn't... And they were like, well, you were boasted about it. Well, it's like, no, we didn't. This is a great moment for the country. We wanted to go out and talk about it. And people forget the leak investigations. Some was because the Republicans demanded them because they thought we were boasting about it. And turns out we weren't, right? But like I'll never forget when Gaddafi was killed. John McCain and Lindsey Graham put out one of their statements, long statement, and they praised like French and they had a narrative, right, that we quote unquote lead from behind, which for the record, neither you or I ever said.
Not accurate either.
And so their narrative was the Europeans did this and we didn't. When in fact, we did most of it. We took out Gaddafi's air defenses, and to the very end, we were flying missions to support every combat operation. We were doing targeted drone strikes. Like we were the most important country in that effort. And they didn't thank American pilots. They thanked European pilots.
That's crazy.
I mean, that's insane. And they wouldn't let Obama have a shred of credit for anything. Even the things that they wanted to have happen. They wanted the Libya intervention to go forward. Right. They certainly wanted to kill bin Laden. And that, to me, like, doesn't get enough attention that, like, there was the extent to delegitimize Obama. Yeah, sure, it was in birtherism and, all the ways in which he was held to a different standard and he doesn't believe in American exceptionalism, even though he said a million times he does. Like, we couldn't even, as a country, have successes around the world because they needed to deny him that credit.
You're geeking out with me on Pod Save the World. More on the way. I have a sensitive face, so there is nothing better than breaking out a brand new Harry's razor blade and getting that extra close shave. It is smoother and cheaper, and they get shipped directly to me, so I don't go to CVS and waste 15 minutes for some bozo to come open the safe where they keep the razor blades like it's Fort Knox. Harry's was started by two guys, Jeff and Andy, who were fed up with being overcharged for razors. They decided to start their own razor company to give guys everywhere what they deserve, a great shave at a fair price. Jeff and Andy bought a factory with 100 years of blade-making experience so they could make their own high-quality razors, sell them online, and ship them directly to you for half the price of the leading brand. Harry's razors include everything you need for a close, comfortable shave. 5 German-engineered blades, a lubricating strip, flex hinge for a comfortable glide, a trimmer blade for hard-to-reach places, and a weighted, ergonomic handle. All this for a $2 blade compared to the $4 or more you'll pay at the drugstore. Harry's is so confident in the quality of their blades that they want you to try their most popular trial set for free. It comes with a razor handle of your choice, a 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel. It's free when you sign up, and you just pay a small fee for shipping. To redeem your free trial offer, go to harrys.com/crookedworld right now. That's harrys.com/crookedworld. At the very end of the administration, there was a big fight with the Israeli government over a UN vote about Israeli settlements. The United States' position is that settlements are illegal, they're unhelpful to the peace process. That's been the position of the United States for decades. A resolution came before the UN Security Council essentially stating that. We did not veto it, we abstained. I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that ridiculous dust-up, and given that you're seeing reports of more settlements being created, of efforts to legalize in Israel all these settlements, isn't that vindication of that effort?
Look, the reason we abstained is clear. Like, we've been raising concerns about settlements for years. It's been the bipartisan policy of the United States for years to oppose settlements, and they kept building them. We tried to have a peace process, and each time it failed, and the Israeli government never took it seriously. They'd get up to a point, and then they wouldn't take the real leap for peace. At the end, the reason we abstained is this. It's not just the settlements. People who follow this know that there are settlements that currently exist that are inside the borders that would be drawn in a peace settlement. Right. In other words, since 1967, there's been some growth in places like Jerusalem that would clearly be a part of Israel in a peace deal, and there'd be some swaps with the Palestinians so they get some other land. It's called, building within the blocks. But But they're building deep inside the West Bank. There are settlements that, like the Amona settlement, deep inside the West Bank, where nobody who's ever looked at the issue wouldn't say that's part of a future Palestinian state. And the growth of those settlements is such that it will make a viable and contiguous Palestinian state impossible, because it will cut off all the different it'll basically leave a few islands of Palestinians amidst a much larger and greater Israel. And furthermore, they're now at a pace of building where the pace of displacement of Palestinians, people being thrown out of their homes, that's happening, right? And lastly, as you point out, they had a bill moving its way through the Knesset with the support of the government to legalize these outposts. Again, not in the blocks, but the outposts. And look, this will kill the two-state solution. It will kill it. And for us to stand by and do nothing and to veto a resolution that is fully in line with our policy and, frankly, the view of basically the majority of the rest of the world, I think would have been betraying both what we believe, but also just facts of how these settlements are corrosive. I'll say on the reaction, the Israeli government spent days talking about how they had this secret information that we had,
Right. What happened with that?
Which we didn't. We were very clear. Like, people were drafting a resolution. Like, the Egyptians put it forward. We didn't draft it. We didn't put it forward, but we did abstain. We own that too, by the way. We weren't trying to deny our position. That was fully our position. But what's interesting is they did the same thing that Trump does. To me, it was kind of like they were using a page out of Trump's playbook. They tried to make the argument about anything except what the policy was.
Right, right.
So instead of saying we defend these settlements are legitimate, they said we can prove that the Obama administration colluded to do this. First of all, we've never seen that evidence. So after popping off about it for a few days, enough to create enough distraction so that the media attention here, I'd go on television and they'd ask me, did you collude? Not like, what do you think about these settlements?
Yeah.
To be fair, Jake Tapper did the best interview with me, and it was a really hard interview. It was about terrorism versus settlements, but not about this stupid collusion charge, which was a sideshow. So when I look back on that, what I see is wrong is that I think there should be more coverage here in the United States about whether we support this settlement movement, because the settler movement has taken over Israeli politics and will make a two-state solution impossible. And is that what we believe? Because if you polled people, do you believe in two-state solution, every member of Congress almost would say yes, and yet they're supporting an Israeli government that is making that impossible. And the thing that would always bother me is people would say, I'm anti-Israel or I'm anti-Semitic. No, I'm not. I'm totally pro-Israel. That's what informs my belief that Israel will be secure in the long term with a two-state solution, because I think it'd be very bad for Israel if essentially their entire foreign policy more and more has to be about defending the settler movement.
When I look back, I think back to the major summit we had with the Palestinian Authority, with Abbas, with Mubarak, with President Obama, with Netanyahu, and all the time and effort President Obama put into this. All the things that were never reported that we offered him to try to get to a two-state solution. I wonder if we were wrong to believe that it was possible with him in charge. If maybe the charitable view is his politics didn't allow it. The less charitable view is he just wasn't committed to getting a deal.
Well, look, it was wrong that he was going to do a peace deal, but we didn't know that. We had to test it. I mean, sure, you could say we should have known, and that's fair. But he was the prime minister, and we had to test it. And because I do believe, I do believe. I don't believe that the UN can impose a peace deal. Or declare a Palestinian state. These people are going to have to live next to each other, and that's only going to work if they make peace together. And so we do support a negotiated settlement. What's clear to me is that Netanyahu has no interest in it. Zero. Zilch. And anybody who believes to the contrary has just not been paying attention.
Right.
Because every decision he's had to make, he's veered right.
Yeah.
If he had to rebuild his coalition, it always went to the right.
Right. Here's Avigdor Lieberman.
Yeah. Now we have Naftali Bennett, and now so he showed his cards amply. But look, this is an important thing that people need to understand about foreign policy. So much depends on who is the leader of another country at a given time, right? If Yitzhak Rabin had been prime minister, Barack Obama would probably have a peace deal, right? Just like
Dmitry Medvedev was still in charge in Russia.
Well, yeah, we got a lot done with Medvedev in the first term. That was important, by the way. We couldn't have gotten the Iran deal without the sanctions we put in place with Medvedev. So it was worth doing that, by the way, with him. The notion that we shouldn't have done that because Putin,
Don't worry, I geeked out hard with McFall on this.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the last thing I'd say is, like, and now people are figuring that out in reverse about Trump, right? Because countries around the world are not going to want to work with us. I mean, we talked about the Muslim world. It's true everywhere. Like if you take Australia or France or Mexico, any one of these countries that it's become public that he like insulted their leaders on the phone. Forget the personal animus. Like the politics in these countries is going to be against cooperating with the United States. That is very powerful. I mean, when Obama came into office, we were able to get European countries that had publics that were profoundly against the war in Afghanistan to ramp up their contributions to the war in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And the only reason we could do that is because Barack Obama was so popular in those countries that people could see that like this was a priority and this was something we had to stick in together. When he's going to have to ask countries to work with us on things, the politics in countries is going to say no. And that's going to have huge ramifications for U.S. interests.
Right. Ben, my last question for you, you've been so generous with your time. I asked Jake about this. It's hard, I think, for anyone who's worked in government or the jobs we had to see the suffering in Syria today and to not feel like heartbroken. And I remember being in meetings with you in those early days when it actually felt like there was a chance this thing could go in a good way because these people would be freed from a dictator. And I remember leaving meetings with you feeling so frustrated by the options that were being laid out on the table because, look, America is exceptional, can do amazing things, but to me it often spoke to the limits of our power as well. And I'm wondering, as you look back and you see the situation today, is there anything you think we should have done different that Trump should do tomorrow or that people listening could do in their own lives personally that might actually help?
Well, it's the hardest thing. Like, we'll be thinking about this for the rest of our lives. What I'll say, though, is that I actually had an evolution in the opposite direction of a lot of people. In other words, you know me, Tommy. Like I started out, I was very interventionist. Let's go, take Assad out, right? That was wrong. I think that was wrong because what the president was looking at was terrible options. Terrible. Because you had essentially, Assad backed by Russia and Iran, so he was going to be around. People say, well, bomb the runways. Well, then the Russians and the Iranians are building the runways again. What do you do? And there wasn't any way to get involved militarily without us fully finishing the job against Assad. This is a country with a sectarian dynamic that, is a mirror image of Iraq, where we couldn't stop killing, that killed tens of thousands of people with all the troops that we had there. The notion that we could somehow do that in Syria, where there were even more proxies, fighting, we never saw that evidence. The opposition has significant amounts of good folks who just want a better life. It also has Al-Qaeda and ISIL and Hezbollah. And you could take Assad out tomorrow. And who would be in Damascus? ISIL and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda. Right. And they, by the way, they'd still be killing each other. I mean, the fighting is so sectarian and so entrenched and is supported by so many proxies that even if you decapitated the regime tomorrow, the war would be just as bad. Right. And so I just never saw in every meeting any option that could credibly make it better and that wouldn't prove to be enormously costly to the United States. So what do you do? And look, I think the beginning is the time that's most interesting to think about. And I don't think arming the rebels, that was always, I think, a false talking point. I mean, we basically ended up doing what was recommended a few months later, and there just was never an option that was of a scale that would have won the war at the beginning. But what do? You one thing you do is you try to alleviate the humanitarian suffering, and that's why we focus so much on refugees. And we provided billions of dollars in humanitarian assistance to support the neighboring countries. And one thing you try to do, and we were beginning to do this, is create pockets that are more secure. So
humanitarian corridors.
And not corridors per se, because that becomes a no-fly zone, which means you're dedicating all your resources in one place, and you're not looking at other places. Right. But if we basically cleared out the border with Turkey, from Kobani, we moved westward and evicted ISIL, and now we're moving down to Raqqa. Trump put a pause on that. But if you were able to kind of evict ISIL from eastern Syria, then you at least have a place that is not under the control of the regime, that is under the control of the opposition, who is not ISIL.
Right.
And that at least, again, it's not about a safe zone. It's just about an area where there's local ground forces who we've trained and have relationships with, and they can start to rebuild Raqqa. That's so. If I was Trump, that I would focus on the part of the country where we are making a difference and get them out of Raqqa. That takes away their so-called capital, but it also begins to leave you with this part of eastern Syria that admittedly is less populated and is not the heart of the country, but is at least a place where some degree of life can resume.
Right. Ben, I miss sharing an office with you, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
This is fascinating. Thank you for 8 years of giving your life over to an administration, to a president, to a country. It's a big deal, and I'm very grateful to you.
Now I get to be a friend of the pod.
Yeah, friend of the pod, man. We'll get a t-shirt.
All right, man.
Thank
Thanks.
you.